what were your takeaways from the UK US trade deal for future trade deals?
Yeah. So what did we say to the rest of the world? We supposedly negotiated with the UK and we started off at 10% plus 25 on a couple different things, steel, aluminum, automobiles specifically. And we reduced everything down to 10%. Okay. So that they got something. And then we had, what cattle or not cattle, beef, soy, ethanol, and sporting goods and a few other things where the tariffs were dropped in some cases all the way down to zero. So that's a good thing. But we did say to the rest of the world that we now have a 10% tax on the incoming good for everything else,
Hmm.
for everything in their particular case, when it was at 2.2%. So yeah, it's not a negotiation that is, designed to get down to 0-0 on both
Yeah,
sides.
it didn't look like they're trying to just do a free trade deal.
No.
Unfortunately, um, UK kind of got a couple of their struggling industries, like their auto, they got down to 10%. I believe steel is at zero until they hit a quota. So essentially, steel has been very lagging in the UK. So it's important for them to kind of prop that industry up.
The auto one was limited too. It's kind of interesting. It's the 10% is on the first 100,000 autos per year,
Yeah.
and when it's more than 100,000, it goes back up to 25%. And the thought process there, at some of these, like Rolls Royce or what have you, and Trump mentioned this, is limited production. It's not going to be a huge impact. Now, the U.S. automakers were pretty pissed off about this deal because there's, for example, Ford had, they mentioned four different vehicles that are made in Mexico under the previous, NAFTA revision USMCA. They had zero tariff. Now they have a 25% tariff. So they're paying a higher tariff on those cars that the US company is making in Mexico to bring that car to sell here than the UK, which is now only paying 10%, at least on those first 100,000 cars. So there was some pushback on that as far as that goes. I don't know what that'll translate to, but
Hmm.
um, I wouldn't be surprised if we aren't sliding towards a 10%, general tariff. I think China will be the one that sticks out as something much higher. And we'll have to see how that
It'll
plays
be
out.
interesting to see where other countries are because UK is one of those trading partners that's small enough that really doesn't move the needle,
Right.
and also they're a trade surplus country.
Yeah.
We're actually making a net surplus when we trade with the UK, and the UK is also kind of isolated when you think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
After Brexit,
Yeah.
they were isolated from the rest of the world with trade,
Yeah.
and so this is I see them doing a deal from a position of weakness rather than leverage.
Yeah. Yeah, I just see this whole thing, and because that's what it means to me is just what does it means to everything else? Because the UK isn't the answer plus or minus. It's what's the signal and how does that work? And I look at the global economy as being fragile. And I have seen it in 2008. I mean, you go back and look at what happened there and watch how things fell apart. It was unbelievable. We dropped 57% in a fairly short period of time and would have probably dropped even further if it wasn't for all the bailout money that came in and the quantitative easing that the Federal Reserve, basically invented in 2008. And so, that's what concerns me when I look at this UK deal. It's like, can the world afford a 10%, 25% tariff on these goods and maybe a 50 or 60% tariff on China, which is so far that's what we've heard of as an end result. Now we have these, the Liberation Day tariffs still hanging out there
Hmm.
that come, 90-day pause is going to be over. Those were really high. So hopefully those don't come back. But nonetheless, so that's when I see that it didn't become a free, because wouldn't that be cool? I mean, let's just go 0-0 with the UK. Yeah, that would be a great example. The rest of the world would be like, yes, or maybe. I know
Yeah,
some places are pretty
they
protective.
probably have some carve-outs for certain industries,
Yeah.
but like if they said everything but these industries, we have 0-0. Like so, it's a majority free trade deal. The
Yeah.
world would be very
Because
happy
I
with that.
think I could be wrong, but I think the tariffs on U.S. dairy going into Canada are really high, maybe even like 200% or some
Yeah.
ridiculous thing. They're trying to protect that industry, So whether they would be willing to go down to zero or not, But anyway, but moving both down, and I guess that sort of happened, but we still ended up at a much higher spot. you
Mhm.
know, than we started at as a total. So
And you can also see that there's an emphasis on agricultural goods out of the U.S.
yes,
Um, and that's a concern for Trump because of that voting bloc. You know, having securing beef,
yeah.
ethanol fuel production going outside. Because I think the world is big enough that it can start to replace the U.S. agriculture if need be.
That is the problem. Like China, they were talking about how they can get their soybeans from Brazil, and a lot of the things aren't irreplaceable. They can get them from different countries. One other part of that deal, which I thought was kind of interesting, was that they basically had the UK buy $10 billion worth of Boeing jets,
Mhm.
right? So remember that China had a bunch of jets that they sent back and stopped orders, and so it is sort of like a carve out thing. It's like Boeing's in there saying, "Hey, put in this,"
Mhm.
you know. So Ryanair or whoever is going to be buying Boeing jets, I guess, to meet these, you know, criteria. So, you know, it's a start. I think that's a positive as far as that goes. At least we're moving, you know, in a direction of we're not adding tariffs, we're starting to subtract tariffs,
Mhm.
which is a good thing. So, and it's a framework for some of these other countries as far as that goes too. Uh,